Well, today we have a special privilege. Barbara White is going to be preaching, and many of you know that Barbara and Joe came here 4 years ago. Is that correct? 5 years ago, when she entered Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And so now they are getting ready to move to Alabama, and this is their very last Sunday here. Barbara was one of our seminary interns, and we are just pleased that you're going to be bringing us the word today. So welcome.
I wasn't nervous until I got up here. And isn't it kind of appropriate? I mean, shipwrecked. How could that fit better with this passage than that? Seriously, because how do people get shipwrecked? Through a storm, right? That, gets the ship wrecked. And so we hear today in the story that Jesus and his disciples were in a storm. I mean, they were in a boat. And when I read this story, and when I kind of thought about it, it's like, okay, so these guys were experienced fishermen, right? How did they not know this was going to happen? And so, like any educated person, to find out how this happened, I Googled it, right? And I found out that these violent, sudden storms are very common on the Sea of Galilee, which the Sea of Galilee is not really a sea. It's more like a big lake. And it's surrounded by these huge mountains, and the wind can come sweeping over these mountains and create this sudden, severe storms. In fact, these storms can be so severe even today that they can sink a large boat. So that was kind of surprising. So Jesus and his disciples were in this boat. And we hear that the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. Storms. We've all been through storms, thunder and lightning and rain, and sometimes we want more rain, but sometimes hail. That wind can be a powerful force. We don't see wind, but we can see the effects of the winds. And water. Water, we have to have it for life. We have to have it for trees. We have to have it for plants. We have to have it to live. But the power of water can be amazing and scary. Sometimes it creates chaos. Hurricane Harvey, for example. And just a few years ago, Nancy's house got flooded with water. Wasn't a welcome sight then. And I personally remember the experience we had in 2005. Well, 2005 was the year for some significant hurricanes. Maybe you remember Hurricane Katrina. Joe and I were living in Lake Charles, Louisiana at the time. Now, we were not personally affected because we were so far west of the storm. The eye hit over New Orleans and Biloxi and in that area, and we all watched the devastation. We watched the flooding. We watched those poor people. Now, we got those refugees in our convention center in Lake Charles. And we came together and we ministered to them. We brought them food and clothes because most of those people, they had lost everything because of that storm. Well, about a month later, I don't know if you remember Hurricane Rita, but I do. Joe and I both do. So Hurricane Rita was churning in the Gulf, and it was this Category 4 storm. And it was heading right for Lake Charles. Well, we had learned a lesson with Hurricane Katrina. You don't stay there, especially when your mayor says, get out. It's a mandatory evacuation. So Joe and I packed up our car and our truck, and I can remember Bailey, who had just turned 12, she had just had her birthday, and we told her, okay, pack a bag with your clothes and then take whatever's important to you. So she comes down the steps with a small bag with her clothes and a giant trash bag. And I go, what's in the trash bag? What's important to me? It was full of stuffed animals. But, we take what's important to us, right? So, of course, people told me when I was at work, they said, oh, we'll be back on Monday. This is what always happens. Nobody anticipated what was going to happen. Lake Charles took a direct hit from a Category 4 storm. It was chaos. Chaos. It was so bad, it knocked down the power lines to the water filtration plant. And it knocked down the power lines to all of Lake Charles. It was hot after that. And people were advised not to come back. In fact, they had people stationed at the roads, don't come back in here. Well, it was hard to get in because the roads were blocked. Lake Charles lost fully half of its trees. And we're talking these huge pine trees, 80, 100 feet tall and huge around. And it looked like a war zone when we finally came back. And it was about 2 weeks later. We were really fortunate. We drove up to our house. There was a pine tree right by it. I mean, right by it. But our house was okay. Behind us, there was a house that had 4 trees through it. Another house had a tree split it in half. I mean, it was just devastating. So storms create chaos. And in a way, each of us is surrounded by some kind of storm. We try to order our lives, but our attempts are just that. They're attempts. We have all kinds of safety plans, and we have security systems, and we take out insurance for this great catastrophe. But insurance doesn't prevent that from happening. Maybe you've seen those Allstate commercials. They're kind of funny, but they're maybe not so funny. Because mayhem is coming. Some of those commercials are a little too real. It appears to be all around us, doesn't it? That mayhem, that chaos. We try to avoid it, but oh man, sometimes it runs down the road to meet us. We live in a constant threat, really, not only from nature with storms, but from life, other people, and oh man, sometimes even ourselves. Hailstorms lurk. Hurricanes and floods happen here in Austin all the time. Drunk drivers careen down the roads. We have no control over that. Addictions resurface, and they're hard to control. Cancers. Cancers decide they've had enough of remission, and they want to return. Even our own bodies break down. And we have no control over that. People in power abuse it, create chaos. Well, if you're uncomfortable or unsettled about this, well, you should be. That's a human feeling. The feeling of being out of control of life. And I'm a big control freak. Ask Joe. Oh, yeah. I want to control all kinds of things, and I drive him crazy. And I become unanxious. I become anxious and settled, and unsettled, just kind of in that state, that fear that something's going to go wrong. That's a very human emotion, right? So how can we handle that fear and that chaos in our lives? To me, that's the question of this story. Because chaos happens. Mayhem is coming. How do we deal with that? When we read this story, we hear that the boat was being swamped despite the disciples' best efforts. And we know that these were experienced fishermen. They were used to being out there. That's how they made their living. They knew the power of the wind and the water. And they also knew that they couldn't just jump out of the boat and swim to shore. Anybody who's ever been in open water during a storm knows that's the worst place to be. The disciples in that boat with Jesus were experiencing that storm. And Jesus was what? He was asleep. For heaven's sake. So what did they do? Well, they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" They don't wake Jesus and say something like, "Hey, Jesus, this storm is pretty bad, and the boat is sinking. Now, we know you have an answer for this, so just tell us what we should do." Oh, no, that's not what they did. I can just imagine what they did. They shook him awake, I'm sure, and they said something like, "Jesus, what is wrong with you? Don't you know we're going to die in this storm? Don't you care? Don't you care?" How many times have we maybe thought that same question, if not said it? Maybe in different words. God, don't you care? Can't you see what's going on? Don't you care at all about us? Don't you care about my mother who's suffering? Don't you care about my child who is sick? Don't you care about our country? Don't you care about us? I think it's interesting how Jesus talked to the disciples after he calmed the storm. What did he say? "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" He didn't say, "Oh, well, so sorry, guys, I was really tired. Sorry you were so worried." Oh, no. In fact, that word used in this text in Greek is deilos. What does that mean? Yeah, it means fearful, but it means a lot more than that. It means cowardly, chicken-hearted, yellow. Wow. Was Jesus calling them cowards? Man, that's pretty brutal. Wouldn't anybody with any kind of sense at all have been afraid at that point? And yet, Jesus called him out. Now, was he being unreasonable? Did he expect them to have no fear at all at this situation? I would have. Or is it because the way they handled their fear showed a lack of faith? Not so much, if only you had a little more faith, but where are you putting your faith? Where? Now, I'm sure Jesus didn't expect them to be quiet through the storm and sink and all that, but he really probably wanted them to manage their fear a little bit better because he was there. He was able and he was going to do something, but fear at that point was ruling their actions, and that's just like us sometimes. Too often, we don't just get afraid. Nope. We turn it into something that occupies our whole lives. We don't just experience it, we turn it into a Category 5 storm in our bodies. And we turn to other things. Maybe magic charms, magic anxiety pills, magic alcohol, or other magic drugs. We don't just feel fear. We let it come in there and it take over our bodies and give it a lot of power. We cling to things that we're afraid of losing and sometimes do anything to keep it. We become incredibly selfish, childish, and angry and bitter when things don't go the way we think they should. And then we blame God, right? We get mad at God. We lose our faith in God. God doesn't expect us not to be afraid. We're going to be afraid. We're human. We're going to be afraid. We're going to doubt. We're going to quake in our boots. But do we really put our trust in God? Sometimes that's really hard. our fundamental belief should be God knows, God cares, God can act. And the challenge for us, the challenge is to look beyond our fears and beyond our doubts, beyond the chaos surrounding us, and see the hand of God's grace and God's mercy. It's all around us. Beyond that chaos, life's twists and turns can be frightening. And I'm not going to pretend that it's easy, because it's not even easy for me. Faith in the love of our God is not a magic charm. It's not something that's going to prevent things from happening, because life happens. But faith is some kind of basic trust. It's a trust in our God who says, I will never leave you or forsake you. But that's really hard. That's hard to believe sometimes. And I suppose that's the real challenge for us, the trust. It's a not really knowing kind of trust, a blind kind of trust. Well, even the disciples, I mean, think about this. The disciples who were there with Jesus, and they had seen all the things that Jesus could do. Even they didn't understand, and they were afraid. In a way, that's kind of comforting, isn't it? I mean, they were right there, and they saw everything, and they got afraid, and they lost faith. And despite that, over and over, the disciples, they seem to show a lack of faith. Kind of read those passages sometimes. It's like, oh, who is this guy? So, it's not surprising that we have trouble. We have trouble because we haven't personally seen Jesus working miracles. We haven't personally been there when he calmed the storm. So it's trouble for us. It's hard for us to believe that God cares. It's hard for us to believe that God is with us. And sometimes we feel that God's asleep in that boat. But that kind of trust, it reminds me of an interview I heard once. It's been some years back, because it was about trapeze artists in a circus. And how many of you guys have been to a circus? I mean, really, they're not even around anymore. I mean, if you're older, sure. Oh, you have. Oh, wonderful. You've seen the flying trapeze artists, right? They're up there. It seems hundreds of feet in the air. Well, it's not probably hundreds, but I mean, they're way up there, and they're swinging around on these swings, right? And then there's one, and then there's the other, and the other one lets go and flips around and gets caught, and we're all. So the interviewer asked the trapeze artist, the guy, and said, okay, can you see the catcher? The one that's catching is the catcher. Can you see the catcher when you let go? He says, no, I can't. And then the interviewer goes, well, how do you know that catcher's going to be there? And the guy says, I have to trust. I have to trust to let go of that bar and know that the catcher is going to be there. Letting go of our fears, turning them over to God, trusting God that will catch us and get us through. Now, God's not going to protect us from bad things happening because mayhem's coming. What it means is when those things do happen, our faith can keep us from going under. That trust that God's really there. We need to turn our attention away from our fears. I need to turn my attention away from the chaos and turn my attention to the one that we can trust with our lives. Jesus calmed the storm. God can calm that storm in our lives. Calm our fears so that we can live our lives with peace in our hearts. And you know that, you may have heard, Joe and I are moving. Well, we sold our house incredibly quickly, within a week. And the couple wants the house like really fast. So we've been through our own personal chaos. These last few weeks it's been very busy, very trying. But we both know that God's leading us to a new place and that He has a plan for taking us there. We all can weather these storms in our life. We all can trust in that one God who loves us, and He will give us strength and comfort to get us through those storms in life. So may our loving God always give us the strength we need to get through difficult times. Let us pray. Lord, we know You love us, and we are so thankful for that. You have promised to always be with us, even in our worst storms. We humbly ask You to give us the strength we need to endure those storms in our life. Help us to trust in You and get us through those times. We ask You to comfort all those who need Your presence in their lives right now. Just as Jesus calmed the storm, Lord, please calm all our storms. Help us to feel Your presence in those difficult times, and help us to feel Your powerful and unending love every day. Amen.